this week, which is how to deal with your shadow side, with your dark side. Shadow work and shadow side is a term that is typically linked with Carl Jung, the psychologist, or psychiatrist. And it's pretty familiar terms, but if you're not real familiar with it, part of what he's trying to say and what I want to talk about is that we all have this shadow side. This part of us that we would, in a certain way, prefer not to have. In a way that we struggle with, that we wish was different, or a lot of what he discovered and pioneered in a way was the fact that we took these parts of ourselves that we didn't like, these disagreeable parts, and kind of hid them away, stuck them down in our subconscious. Now, it didn't make them go away, but it made it much more problematic to deal with because in a certain way we weren't aware of the fact that we did this. Now, this could happen from a lot of different things, from our traumas in our past, from not knowing how to deal with certain situations, from having certain character like certain ways that we deal with things, right? In other words, not dealing with them typically. And this is not unusual. I think a lot of us find that we have this struggle. That's different from everybody too, right? What you can deal with and what you don't like to deal with varies. I mean, I know for my wife, the things that are really challenging for her are pretty easy for me and vice versa, strangely enough, right? So this all kind of comes into and starts to develop our dark side. So what's really important about this is that if we don't look at this, if we're not aware of it, we'll find that it rules our life far more than we would like. And that's what I really want to get into, is how to work with our shadow side, with this thing that's very challenging too, by the way, right? I mean, I love that quote that I put with the description, which was that, we don't reach enlightenment by dwelling on light, but dealing with our darkness, something like that, right? So that's because this is important work. If we don't bring light into these dark spaces, we'll find that they sabotage us again and again. These ways that we run into our shadow side are so varied, right? I know that I had, when I'm definitely going to be talking about some of my own personal experiences with working with my dark side and my shadow sides, but I also know that mine, it may not be yours. That's really important to point out, right? Because I'm going to talk about some of my situations, but yours may be absolutely diametrically different, from the ones that I'm going to share with you that I had to deal with. And just because you're experiencing something that sounds completely different doesn't mean that it still isn't something that falls in this category of a shadow side. One of the defining characteristics, at least to me, of our dark side is the fact that, one, that we don't like it, right? There's something about it that doesn't feel good, that we kind of want to repress, that we don't want to deal with. The other is its compulsory nature. Like, in other words, it just happens. And we're going to get into that. The fact that there's usually something that triggers this shadow side, an awakening of this shadow side. I'm going to share with you the teaching, which was not a Carl Jung thing, actually, that shifted my whole entire life, actually. So I'm very excited to talk about that. Before I do, I want to say, as I always do, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the subscribe button. I actually just noticed on YouTube that I'm at 599 subscribers, so you could be the 600th subscriber. Click that button and do that. It would be so wonderful. I would appreciate it. Like the video, leave a comment. This video that I'm doing today, all about our shadow side, is actually a follow-up to last week's How to Love Yourself, which I got a really good response. I got a whole bunch of comments and a whole bunch of feedback from all kinds of people. Some, on this video itself, some personally, personal emails and such, that I could sense that this was a very important topic, that it resonated with people. And in this video, this live stream is actually a follow-up, because how to love yourself is a big part of that, is understanding how to deal with your dark side and what it means. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to start with the What's Real with Adrien segment of this live stream, which is where I'm going to talk about myself a little bit. I think it brings context to it. Now, I've told this story many, many times, and I think you'll see the value in it. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to set a scene, sort of. I'm going to share with you where I was as I started to learn about this thing that shifted my whole entire life. Now, I had a dark side. I actually talked about this in one of my live streams where I think it was, wherever you go, there you are. That I spent a good portion of my early 20s running from this shadow side, from these demons that I felt like I had, that I was only loosely or, I was barely aware, dimly aware of, right? And it was... it was probably quite a few years after that where I had a break, if you will, or a reprieve from this darkness, right? But then again, it reared its head. And I've shared this story before. It actually culminated on a Father's Day. And I had a terrible Father's Day. And it wasn't because of anybody around me. Actually, quite to the contrary. I was surrounded by loving, supportive people. But I was miserable. When I woke up that night, and that was certainly, by the way, just to make sure we define that was absolutely, that day I was completely in the grip of my shadow side. When I woke up the next morning, I realized, wow. Well, there was one very clear thing, and it was for me at that moment, which was I have to stop drinking alcohol. I knew that was the trigger in a way, or it's a long story, but that was certainly a big, it contributed largely to what happened the day before. And I looked at what happened the day before, and I thought, I do not want that to happen, so no more drinking. And I did that. I stopped drinking, and it was probably about 2 months into total sobriety that I came across the book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Very famous. This is pretty much a classic already now, right? I mean, this is a really popular book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic, powerful book. It mostly centers around living in the present moment. And that was incredibly useful for me, too. And I got a lot out of that. Actually, that continued to bear fruit, remembering and coming back to the present moment and following his teachings and going back and back. But the one I want to share with you that really, I think, at that point, at that moment in my life, did the trajectory shift more than anything else, was his teaching about the pain body. Now, that's pretty much just another term for shadow side. He defined it as, and I'm totally ad-libbing here because it's been 20 years probably since I've read the book, but he defined it as negative energy that got stored away because we didn't know how to deal with it, right? I mean, it was, whether it was that traumatic experience, whether it was a whole bunch of ruminating, right, all this negative thinking, dwelling in a negative way, having negative emotions, and just not knowing what to do with it. And so usually pushing them under, and they got stored and created a certain, everyone has their own, right, a certain pain body. It lived, it was born from pain, and it lives on pain. Meaning that it loves to cause negativity. That's what it feeds on. I'm pretty sure that was the exact words he used. Your pain body feeds on negativity, so it's always trying to cause it. Well, God, when I heard that, and I was ripe, right? I think I've said that. I couldn't. It was so like, oh my God, that's it. That's what I've been experiencing for decades, or at least a decade, right? It was an awakening in a certain way. And I haven't yet shared with you what it was, what the awakening. Now, yeah, I learned about the pain body. It resonated deeply with me. But I'm about to say what it was, and I hope that you hear this, because if we all have a shadow side, by the way, this is that thing. This is pretty much Carl Jung has established, right? There isn't a single one of us that isn't walking around with something that we're repressing, something that we would like to be different when we behave certain ways, right? For me, when I heard about the pain body, when I understood it, I saw it so clearly. What I saw was, it wasn't me. The way that he described it made me realize it was this energetic field that was stored in me, so to speak, but it wasn't who I was. It was so liberating. Now, certainly not trying to oversell it. It wasn't like everything shifted right away like that, but it was the beginning. It was a real beginning too, because I realized the way I interpreted it, and maybe he used these terms, I don't want to get myself in trouble by misquoting somebody, but the way I interpreted it, maybe because of my Christian background or something, it was like a demon. It was like a demonic possession almost. There was the trigger. I actually remember specifically what triggered me that day on Father's Day. I'm not going to share, it's too convoluted, but there was a trigger. There was a specific trigger, and boom, it woke up my pain body, to use his terms. It woke up my shadow side. And from that moment on, who I knew myself to be in a certain way was overtaken by this demon. And at that point, nothing pleased him. Nothing could be right. He was hell-bent, this thing in me was hell-bent on creating pain and suffering. Because that's what it felt like. That's what it felt. That's what it lives on, and that's what it is. It's almost like that's what the core of it is. Now, one of the ways that my pain body or dark side displayed itself was anger. And this is what I mean. Like it's a pretty easy one to see as a shadow side, right? Like, ooh, gosh, yeah, nobody. Well, I'm talking about explosive, really bad anger, right? I had the Italian blood in me, and that was one of the major ways that my dark side would manifest itself. Another one was depression, and some of that was deeply hidden. Meaning, like, even for myself, sometimes, as weird as that may sound, like I wouldn't even realize how negative I was feeling inside until it got so bad that I couldn't ignore it anymore, This was my story. I want to point out that it may not be your story. This is so important to me because our shadow sides can be very elusive, right? In other words, anger was pretty easy to see. When I would explode into this crazy rage, it was a little hard to ignore, right? But yours may be totally opposite. Yours may be withdrawing. Yours may be some sense of independence, like, I don't need anybody, or pleasing people, right? But you're actually hiding. You're repressing your real feelings. A lot of times you'll be the victim of the energy vampires. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, right? But people who just suck you dry, so to speak. And even though this might not sound like a shadow side, it is. Part of it is you can know for two reasons, right? You're not proud of it, so to speak, and that's not a good word, but you're not comfortable with it. You wish you were different. You wish you could stand up to that person maybe, right? And also because it's compulsory. A lot of times it's not really a choice. It's like it takes over, right? There's a part of you that's inside going, why am I letting this person do this to me? But there it is, right? There you are doing it. I have such good news for you today. It's not you. Now, this is tricky business when I say something like that because that could easily lead into more repression. Can you feel that in a way? Because you could say, that's not me, just go away, bye-bye, right? It's not that easy. I wish it was that easy. But realizing that this is not who you are is essential. Because if you don't see that, if you don't open to that, it will always have some sort of hold on you. This is what happens a lot of times when people get diagnosis, right? Like, you're clinically depressed. Ooh, ow, forever. It can be a sentence, a life sentence almost in a way, if we're not careful, right? The list of those sorts of things is just an example. I mean, there's a whole long list of other things. I want to be careful because I don't want to step in some dangerous territory here. But understanding that this is just something that's happening, that this is something that exists. We certainly don't want to deny it, but it's not who you are. Here's how I love to prove this simple point, okay? This is again, one of those beautiful things that when I realized it, this was actually quite late in my spiritual path, but it led to another awakening in its own way, right? It was the reality of our true nature. What Buddhists would call your Buddha nature, right? And so few of us are actually familiar with this part of ourselves because we're run about by shadow sides, and there's lots of, that's the dark side, right? That's the parts that we want to pretend like we don't have, we don't exist. But then there's all these parts that we try to put forth, right? The happy face, the whole game. Right? Putting on all the masks. All this is burying, in a strange way, is covering our true self. How do you get to know your true self? How do you know what your true self is? It's very simple. It's very, very simple. You've experienced it every single time you've ever really relaxed. Now, it might be on vacation, it may not be. It may be just that moment, that simple moment where everything felt right. You weren't holding on to anything. Everything was easy. You were relaxed. And what did that feel like? It felt good. It felt okay, right? In order to relax, as I often say, there's only one way to relax, to have that experience, that is your true nature, is to let go. This is that sign. This is a way of showing you in a very real terms that is your true nature, because all you have to do is let go of all that noise, and all of a sudden, what arises? Not always right away, right? But whenever you're able to let go at a certain level, and to whatever level, you'll experience this inner wellness. Wellness meaning just okayness, goodness. The deeper you go into that, the richer that experience is. But whatever level you've ever reached it, that's your experiencing and tasting your true self. This is who you are. Why? How do you know? Because you don't have to do anything for it to happen, right? So let's go back to our shadow side. Well, this just happens too, right? I mean, that's a compulsory nature to it. Well, yes, for sure. But again, it starts with a trigger. Now, I should say that, of course, it started way back. It started back when we weren't paying attention to the things that were happening and how we were dealing with it. You know, this is one of those things that I think about so often, that I would love to be participating in shifting this in the world, right? We teach so much stuff in school, and a lot of it wonderful. We do not teach, or rarely is it taught, how to deal with negative thoughts and emotions, right? Why? It's such an important part of being human. We all experience it, and not knowing how to deal with this leads to great deals of trouble. Almost all trouble comes from this. Not knowing how to deal with our negative thoughts and emotions and negative experiences, right? When something bad happens, it has nothing to do with us. Somebody behaves a certain way towards us, or, right? All that stuff, and not knowing what to do with it. Well, the truth is, very few of us do. And so, because of that, all this stuff gets stored up, right? It all exists on an energetic level too. That's why it's like that demon sort of thing, right? Whether it's that part of you that withdraws or the part of you that explodes like I did, right? It has this energetic quality to it that once it's triggered, takes over. Like a possession in a way. So hopefully we've established this. Hopefully this sounds familiar. By the way, other ways that this will come into being is lots of compulsory things, right? Whether it's compulsive eating, whether it's addictions of all sorts, whether it's compulsive behavior. One of the biggest ways we see it nowadays is social media, not being able to step away from it. This is my dark side. In a way, if it's dominating you, if you would like to spend less time on social media, but you're finding you continuously stay there, yeah, it's the start. All of this comes about, though, from a lack of awareness of what we're doing, right? A lot of times we're doing these sorts of things because we're attempting to avoid a feeling that we don't like, right? It's escapism, so to speak. So how do we start to deal with the trigger, right? Because that's what it boils down to now. Okay, we can talk about forever where it came from, but let's talk about now where we are, when it happens, when the shadow side gets triggered. What do we do about it? How do we deal with our shadow side? Well, I already said, one of the first things is to really open to the fact, if you can see, and this is a progression of things here, to see that it's not you, right? This is where we're trying to lead to, at least the first couple of steps. So the first thing is awareness, okay? Watch the trigger. When it happens, start to be mindful of it. First of all, I would say get curious. Curiosity is a huge part, and that is some of your true nature too, because there's part of you that's like, what is going on? This is crazy, right? I mean, how come I can't stop looking at social media, right? I want to. I don't want to. Set it down. But then you're feeling that urge, right? The notification thing goes off and you want to check it, right? But you don't want to, but you want to. What is that? Watch. Get curious. What is happening there? That's kind of a light example. I'm not sure it does the subject justice, right? Let's talk about something that's similar, but darker, maybe, right? Maybe you have a pornography addiction. Something triggers your desire to look at porno. This can be something that you feel very shameful about. It could be a great deal of shame. So you have the trigger, you try to resist, but what happens? You find yourself doing it anyways. And then then the whole experience runs itself out, right? You feel this guilt, this shame, and it starts all over again, right? What about that one? What about drinking? What about, the list is so long, right? What about exploding on your partner? I know that was one that I did a lot. Get curious. Get curious. What's going on? So you're going to bring some awareness into that moment. Then what are you going to do? Nothing. That sounds crazy, right? That doesn't sound like very much. This is the best advice I can possibly give you. Watch. This is how we start. Pay attention to the trigger, what triggers it. Then watch. As long as you can. The longer you're doing that, strangely enough, the more or the less of a hold that possession, that pain body has on you. Because there's some part of you that's separate a little bit, that's kind of watching the whole thing happen. This leads into the second thing, because what happens there, I love this part too. If you pay attention, there's the trigger, whatever it is. Your spouse said that thing, right? But if you pay close attention, there's always a little space, a little gap between that trigger and the reaction and the awakening of the pain body. It can be very, very small, a split second, but there is a moment. Looking for that moment is very powerful. Because watching that, seeing it, feeling it, immediately awakens you to something else. There's a break in that compulsion. Now, it may happen right after that, but there was a moment. This is the clue, okay? This is the clue. What we're trying to do, what we want to do is open that moment, that space a little bit more. The more we can open that space, the more we can allow something else to happen instead of compulsive behavior, instead of possession, to use kind of a strange word. Believe it or not, this really works. The other reason it works, and we're going to get into more. This is not all of it. This is a long. By the way, you are not going to shift this overnight. Now, you may have an experience of shifting it really quick. Like, in other words, you get really in touch with what I'm saying, and you see that trigger, you see the space, you open to it, and all of a sudden it just doesn't happen like it normally does. That's wonderful. It's probably beginner's luck, though. Okay, so don't get attached to that. It's still wonderful, though. Celebrate it, because you just proved it can be done. We want to grow that space. And one of the ways that we typically don't, and actually I haven't mentioned the most important part of what actually happens, because I haven't used the word. The word is very powerful. What actually happens when that pain body wakes up? We identify with it. We think it's us. I mean, that's what's implied when I said I realized that it wasn't me. I started to disidentify with it. I realized it was all this stored up negative energy. It was a demon in a way, right? It wasn't who I was. The moment I disidentified, I stopped identifying with it completely, I started to experience some freedom from it. I started to see a small growing in that space I'm talking about. When we identify with it, we feed into it. And that's what it wants, right? That's what it lives on. That believing it is feeding it. Does that make any sense? So the less we can do that, and this is the trick, we start to just allow it to happen. We don't feed into it so much. The more we do that, what's actually happening, and it may take some time, I really want to stress that, but it is happening. It's dissipating. Because what's happening when you identify with it is you're feeding it still. So instead of it slowly just kind of working itself out, which is what it wanted to do in the beginning, when we didn't know what to do with that negative emotion, that negative feeling, that negative energy, we stored it. We shoved it down. And it stuck around. It just wants to be expressed and freed, actually. It's so beautiful. When I say that shifted my life, so much of the way, like I expressed at Father's Day, the shame and guilt in that, right? In behaving that way. It was, that goes back to what I also shared about in the last live stream, where I couldn't even stand the sight of myself, right? It came down to that. Because of that, because of behaving that way, right? Well, so once I realized, that's not who I really am. But who's doing it then? Well, this energetic thing needs to be expressed. It needs to be let go. It needs to be open to and allowed so that it can work its way through, work its way out, right? This is what happened for me personally, and I've seen it happen with many other people. When we do that, instead of feeding into it, by the way, guilt and shame are wonderful. It's one of its favorite foods, if you want to say that, right? It loves to feed on guilt and shame. It's important to say that this is not about a get-out-of-jail card. This is actually responsibility. Why? Because it's the ability to respond. Respond, not react, not get caught up. Can you feel the difference there? Not have this compulsive possession, right? But to actually respond, to be responsible, to open to it. This doesn't mean we feed it, though. See, that's why I'm hoping I'm making that really clear. It's not a get-out-of-jail card, free card. It's not like, just do whatever you want to do and behave the way you want and then don't feel bad about it and it'll go away. That's not what I'm saying, right? I'm saying that you have to open to this negativity. You have to allow it to run its course when it comes. Because if you repress it, if you feel guilty about it, if you feed into it, that's what you're doing, right? You're feeding it so it sticks around. This is what it lives on, right? So if you take this away, you literally take away the air that it needs to breathe. Now, depending on how big and established, if you will, your dark side or shadow side is, this can take some serious amounts of time. Working with somebody can be very helpful, by the way. So I definitely want to say that, whether it's a therapist or a life coach or a spiritual counselor, whatever those things, whatever works for you, can be very useful in helping you deal with this. A lot of times, too, because what happens is we'll make progress because this works, right? And what'll happen is we'll feel like, oh, I got it. I've really got this down. I'm doing great. This is amazing. And then it comes back. And then when that happens, it's like, oh, God, I thought I was making so much progress and I've made none. No. Okay? That's where it's really helpful to have somebody say, no, please don't do that to yourself. You have made tons of progress, right? Sometimes we need to hear that from somebody else. It's helpful, If you don't have somebody else, I'm telling you right now, if you're going to experience that, by the way, it's almost not an if, and it doesn't mean that. Don't fall in that trap. It just means get back on the horse, so to speak, right? The next time it happens again, that's fine. It means, too, what happened is it's starting to, this energetic quality, this demon, if you want to say, is paying attention and it's looking at, okay, starts to fall back and just try to figure out what's going on. This is different, right? This is different. It kind of takes a back seat, but then it reasserts itself. Wonderful. This isn't a bad thing. This is a wonderful thing. This is an opportunity for you to go deeper, to really let it out. It takes that. That's a really important pivotal moment. And then it happens again. How long is this going to happen? It's going to happen as long as it takes. But I can guarantee you that if you're working in this way, you will find progress. And you will notice it too. Just because, that's what I'm trying, I hope I'm making that clear too. Just because you have it reassert itself, just because it comes up again, doesn't mean you failed, doesn't mean there isn't progress. It's important. It's really, really critical. Because if you fall in that trap, then you're starting to identify with it again. That's what's happened, right? Because it's come up again, you say, well, it's not working, I'm not good at this. It's not it at all. It just takes time. I can guarantee you, whatever pain body you have, whatever shadow side you have, it wasn't developed in a day or two or a year or two. It was decades, depending on, right? It took a long time. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take that long. This has a lot to do with, too, how sincere you are in your willingness to confront it. And a lot of times that'll have to do with how much it's disruptive in your life. If it's really, really disruptive, then it kind of becomes very important. That's how it was for me. I could feel like if I didn't take care of this, first of all, I didn't like the parenting I was doing at all, and I may not be sticking around with this woman that I adore, or she may not be sticking around with me, is how I mean to say, right? Then it became very obvious, and plus the misery of it was just overwhelming sometimes, That's why I look at that and I say, thank God. I'm so grateful for that misery. As weird as that sounds, it woke me up. It deepened my whole entire life. It made my wife and I's relationship deeper. It's made my relationship with my kids and I deeper. It's added depth to my whole entire life. That's why the shadow side seems like this is part of its purpose, by the way, is to help us do this work, to learn this reality that you are not your thoughts and emotions. You're far, far more. And sometimes we have to engage in some really negative behavior before we wake up to this fact. So I highly recommend reading the book, The Power of Now. I highly recommend looking in. There's a ton of, when I created this video, shadow work is a big thing. So there's plenty of people talking about it. It's interesting. It's an interesting topic, and it's an important one. Carl Jung's work that he did on that, I'm very grateful to that man for the territory that he explored, right? Because I know he did it himself. This wasn't just something he did with other people. He did this work. I was going to share a story, actually, and I'm going to probably wrap it up at this point. I was going to share a story that I came up with the idea. I'm going to do this video as a follow-up to How to Love Yourself. And it was probably 2-3 days later. I'm working around the house. I got this really big project going on, along with everything else. Life's very busy, right? And I had a reoccurrence of what you could call, or what I would probably call, my pain body, which is very, very rare at this point in my life. Now, it was pretty mild even, but it was absolutely, it was triggered by a very common situation. In other words, this was a situation that would trigger me very often in the past. And I had to reflect on that. I was like, here I am. I'm about to talk about this and share with people how to free yourself, how to deal with your shadow side, right? And all of a sudden, I had a reoccurrence. The irony of that did not elude me. What was wonderful about that was the fact that, okay, I was aware. There was accountability, responsibility in that way too, right? I saw it. Unfortunately, my wife was around for it a little bit, so I felt a little guilty about that. Like, I hate to have somebody else have to be exposed to it. It was just mostly me losing my temper, right? But about an hour later, it was done. It was gone. Why? Because of this exact technique that I'm teaching you now. Because I don't identify with it anymore. It happened, but I don't identify with it. It just happened. Now, do I feel like that's some big slip in my spiritual life? No, it just happened. Not at all, honestly. Matter of fact, I don't want to say it's fun to experience it, because it's definitely not fun, but it is interesting almost, like to see that happen again. Interesting. There's definitely something there. More to work on. That doesn't discourage me at this point in my life. Now, depending on where you are, I could understand why it would. I know I've experienced that discouragement many, many times in my life. At this point, though, here's your future. This is what I'm trying to share with you, right? It doesn't discourage me at all. It actually shows me there's a little more work to do. That almost excites me. It gets me kind of like jazzed. Like, all right, let it go. Open some more. Open some more. There's more freedom to be had. This is what awaits you on the other side, so to speak, right? Because now, if you friend your shadow side, right, then it loses its power. I don't know if you can feel that. It doesn't have the same hold on you anymore. If you're not afraid of it, if you're not trying to shove it away, it loses its grip. It loses its potency. It doesn't mean it doesn't still happen. It doesn't mean that the experience is not pleasant. That's not what we're saying, okay? But it means that there's freedom lying on the other side, because if you allow it to be, you don't feed into it, you watch for that moment, you grow the space, it'll run its course, and you'll feel freer after. You'll have discharged some of that negative energy. You'll actually have worked through it. Now, by the way, too, sometimes when you're doing this work, it almost intensifies the negativity because you're really opening to it, right? Now, not always. This doesn't always happen, but it can. This is not a bad thing either. You know, we do this to our threshold, if you will, right? Where we can tolerate it. To open to it, if that makes sense. That's what I'm trying to say. The more we're able to do that, and we take steps towards that, the more we'll find freedom from it. You know, when I got in the grip of anger again like that, there didn't feel like any freedom in that moment, but there still was, funny enough, because there's a part of me now that doesn't associate with it at all. So I know it's just a matter of time. Just let it be. Don't feed into it any more than you can, than you have to, than you can, you know, and just let it be. Wait it out almost is pretty much what it is. And when I say an hour, I mean, it was much sooner than that, but I'm saying an hour and it was gone. It was done. It ran its course completely. I encourage you, look for the moment, look for the triggers, whatever your shadow side is, and realize that it's not you. There's a space. open to it, bring awareness to it, and you'll see a shift. I'm excited for you for that moment. As always, I thank you for your time. It's precious. Was it working? Because, yeah, I don't know why the screen was saying